Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of the Systeme.io podcast with me, Natasha Pinto. Today, our guest is Terry Schilling. He's an expert copywriter that helps brands communicate their message, and he specializes in working with creative companies and entrepreneurs to get the right customers. Welcome, Terry.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
We are thrilled to have you on the podcast. It's really exciting. We haven't had a copy expert on here yet, but before we dig into your impressive skills, I would like to ask you about your history. So how did you get to where you are today? Because usually the kind of online business or online freelancer path doesn't run smooth. You sort of start in something and accidentally end up somewhere that you didn't think you would.
That's definitely like the common origin story for a lot of us. It's just we're looking to do one thing and then we kind of roll into this one, which I definitely have that similar path. And so I like to kind of say it where I went from aspiring sports journalist to working in a marketing company and then to shifting then to my own business, right? And so I love telling stories, from growing up, from being a kid, teenager, and always had a passion for sports. And so went to university to be a sports broadcast journalist. And after graduating, just looking at the different paths, then started just taking ones into really communications and marketing. And it's so interesting too, because a lot of friends that I had who were in like the same classes at university in journalism have shifted into marketing now, which is really interesting. Like that, it just seems like a natural pivot for us. And so I was working at a creative agency for a while, working for a lot of large brands, people like Home Depot and Volkswagen and Brooks Brothers, and getting a nice portfolio and a nice experience working with different teams and getting that kind of experience that was really helpful. And then I just started getting the itch about probably like 5 years ago of just the entrepreneur itch, and started, consuming content like from Dory Clark and from Gary Vee, and thinking of just like, man, this sounds something like I could do. And then just started freelancing on the side on sites like Upwork and Fiverr, taking some projects, and just realized I can do this on my own. And, about almost 4 years ago, shifted to the full-time business, and it's just continuing to evolve. And, now working with a handful of companies from mid to large size businesses on conversion copy for websites, email marketing products. And it's kind of where I've gotten today. A lot of things just continuing to learn on my own and get the help from the community, which is nice.
That's great. And then a question I like to ask quite a lot of our guests is, can you give us a comparison from like when you started out on your own, like that first freelance gig, how much were you paid for the first bit of copy you put out there on your own, to how you're doing today? Because I think it can be quite disheartening when you like put your first thing forward and either you have to charge nothing for it, or like you make $10 and you're like, well, that was hours of work.
Yes, absolutely. So I just remember going on, I think it was like Elance at the time, right before Upwork, and looking for different writing projects, and just me being a copywriter at an agency, and with my writing background, I'm like, let's see what I can get on here. I just remember seeing someone post looking for help writing a very short children's story and revising like my first draft, right? And so I looked at it and I charged $40 for it, or maybe that's what their budget was for. And I just took it on. I'm like, oh, this might not take me that long. $40 may not seem too bad. And got it. The client loved it, but like looking back now, I'm just like, oh my gosh, I probably spent maybe like 5 to 6 hours kind of writing that for $40. And it's really interesting. And then like my first website copy project where I wrote probably like 3 pages was maybe like $300, like $100 per page.
Oh, wow.
And then to shift to now, just learning about what all entails and the value that I can bring a client, and just things of just like smoothing out that relationship and like really focusing specifically on an offer. I can charge, anywhere between like, let's just say like $7,000 and $10,000 for like a full website project now, a couple of years later. And so
I think
it is interesting looking how far you've kind of grown.
Well, definitely. And that number kind of puts, I suppose, a cost to your skills, and shows you how developed. And it's awesome. I think that's really encouraging.
Absolutely.
can definitely look forward to that. You're not always going to be charging $10 for your first project. All right. Now, my next question for you
Exactly.
is there an obstacle or a setback that you faced in your career that kind of gave you pause to think, maybe I should give up, maybe this isn't for me? And how did you get past that?
Yeah, I mean, imposter syndrome, I battle that, probably once a day at least, of just kind of like feeling good about something and then seeing somebody else kind of thrive on social media, or like, or saying something that like, oh, that totally resonates, makes sense with me. Um, I would just say early on in my career as a freelancer, like full time, I had this really big project, and with an agency, they hired me as a contractor, and it was my largest contract to date, and everything was going well. Worked with them, sent the first draft. Their client came back with a handful of feedback, and working with them again, and then another draft, and it wasn't quite right. And then the agency decided to let me go. And it was really hard. And I could kind of like, in a way I could sense, because I just felt like I was forcing it and just didn't really know, like, is my process right? Is my framework right? Like, can I even charge this much? Like, am I going to get a project like this again? And it was really rough, really thinking about what I could do. Maybe should I go back full time and continue to own on my skills, maybe work with a different agency. And the agency came back to me and said, Terry, let's talk. Honestly, this isn't you, the client. Maybe we didn't prepare you well enough, and the client just has an idea in their mind. Like, we really liked what you came up with. Would love to work with you again. But right now we're just going to do this in-house to save time of continuing to go back and forth, because it seems like we need to go back to the drawing board. And so, of course, like, it sucked kind of hearing that, like, I lost the project, but then it was just more reassuring that it wasn't completely my skill set, and that I just wasn't really drafting up the right copy or taking the right approach. And then they ended up hiring me a couple months later for a new project, and that went great from beginning to end. So, I think that part just kind of kept me going, that I could do this, and really had me spend a lot of energy and resources on, mastering my process, if you will, of just like, what do I enjoy doing? What can I offer that I feel like clients would pay my worth for, So that's kind of where I came out of that one. But it was definitely early on within my first year. I was really excited about it. And then it's like, okay, we're back down to earth a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of people resonate with that. You get a lot of success in maybe a burst after you've just started, and you kind of hit that momentum, and then eventually you hit a block or a wall, and you're like, oh, I don't know if this is for me. And it's great that you took it as an opportunity to hone your skills rather than just completely give up and throw in the towel.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to ask you about these skills. So what is your definition?
Let's do it.
So what is your definition of what makes good copy?
Oh, man, good question. I have this philosophy of good copy tells people how cool they can be, not how cool you are. And so what I see a lot, especially with maybe like startups, B2B companies, they've created this thing, they've spent all this time, and they know that it can help people. They have this like minimal viable product, which is great. And a lot of times they just start with like, we did this, or, entrepreneurs may be like, I can help you do XYZ. And so there you're just talking to them, and you're really bragging. You're not putting the customer's self-interest first. So you can flip those things around, where you can even say, discover how you can achieve XYZ. So now you're telling them, you're making them feel cooler instead of telling them how cool you are for creating this product. So like putting the reader first, and then just honestly just knowing as much about the audience as possible is really like the key to writing good copy. Because again, it's easy to brag about what you do and you think it solves a specific problem. But when you start doing this research and you know about the customer, you can tap into those feelings and those transformations that can happen. And that's kind of my long answer of what I feel defines good copy.
No, I think it's a good answer. And then my follow-up to that would be, how do you go about researching your audience, making sure that you've got the right kind of research about them? So what are, let's say, 2 tactics that you recommend for getting more information about your audience?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, like research is such like the key to crafting good copy, because if you can get into really the voice and know how your customers are talking, like that's good copy right there that you can absolutely use within it. So ways to do that is to really just find out where your audience hangs out. So, if it's, do they really talk a lot on Reddit? Like if you're solving a problem, or people on LinkedIn or people on Instagram, join some private communities, join conversations on Reddit, see how people are answering those questions. What problems are they looking to solve? That's a good one. I love going to YouTube. It's a big tactic for me of researching, is going to YouTube comments as well, and really just seeing how people are commenting on these like top watched videos. And then you'll find that like, oh, this is great. I would love if you talked about how to do this. And like taking that of like what they're looking to discover, you can use some of that language within your copy as well. And that's really some of the big tactics that I have just from a research standpoint. If you have customers come up with a survey and start researching that, and or send those out and get some feedback, as well.
Yeah, definitely. I really like your tactic of kind of using what people are commenting on other people's YouTube videos. It's a great way of creating content that is perfect for someone else's audience, especially because it shows you that there are people who are looking for that as well. Now, what is the biggest mistake that you see people making with their website copy in particular?
The biggest mistake that I see, well, I know we touched on it a little bit with that they talk about themselves first as well. But with that said, I just feel like they don't spend a lot of time on the headline, honestly. And they just think that they want to say something interesting and just get them to buy right away. And so like you really have to spend time on that headline. And again, it goes back to knowing as much as your audience as possible, right? But another key mistake with like not spending enough time on the headline is they ask them to buy too soon. Like there's been studies show that if you put your call to action button, like one where they can sign up for your offer, put in their credit card information towards the bottom of your page, the increase of them actually clicking that, your click-through rates increase. Because if they can't trust you, if they like look at this page, top of the fold, and start scrolling, if they can't find a reason to trust you, they're just going to go jump off. Because really, people spend 5 seconds on a web page and they need to know what's in it for them. Are you telling them something they need to hear to keep them reading along? And so when I look at websites and work with clients, I'm looking at like, what's the next question that they want? Like if we write a really good headline and strike curiosity and, sell an outcome, do they want to know what the price is, or do they want to know how it works? Right? Use that as your button towards the top to take them down the page, to keep them reading. Right? So there's some sales pages where I feel like I know my audience. Like if I'm sending something out to my list and I'm telling them about it, like it's a workshop, at the top of my workshop page, I'm going to say, tell me how much it costs as a button. And then they go down. And then when they go down to that section, I have more copy to entice them. I'm telling them how much it is, but I'm also giving some benefits of, why it's worth that investment.
Definitely. And we're going to jump onto that now. So obviously attention spans are at their all-time lowest. We have the focus of less than a goldfish, according to a recent study. So can you give us some tips on the art of a good headline? Because that's obviously the first thing people say, but you don't want to, like you said, sell immediately. Your headline is not your sales pitch.
Right. No, absolutely. Some of the biggest things that I honestly could recommend is spark curiosity. And one of the easiest ways to do that is the power of a question mark. And so just ask a simple question. And, that could be after doing some of your research, asking the right question could be really trying to speak to them of just like, what is their like dream outcome? And then think about that. So then what holds them back from it? And so it could be like, do you struggle finding time to work out? Even just as a question mark. But again, like what those do so well is that it opens up this loop in our head that we want to close by seeing that question for us to keep writing down. So that curiosity could be there. And there's like multiple formulas and ways, that you could do that, which, I can happily get into and share some resources down the line. But I feel like, me just spitting formulas for these next few minutes could take a while. But also like right to the reader's self-interest. And so again, like sell that outcome, sell that transformation from the beginning with tapping into a headline. One way that I like to do that is like sell the dream and then answer the objection. And so I like to use this example where like, all right, the dream is I want to learn a new language. But the objection is that it takes too long. I don't have enough time to learn this. So I want to learn Spanish. I want to learn French, but how can I find all this time? Well, your headline could be like, learn how to speak French in 15 minutes a day. Right. And it could just be these little lessons. And it's just like, okay, that just seems pretty simple.
Yeah.
Right. Or it's just like, you know, and then another one I like to use is like from like a dating app site from like Bumble, how they've kind of crafted their message. And it's like the dream is to finding a good match online, because I don't, it's tough to find someone in the real life, going to restaurants and bars and or like finding someone at work maybe now, but finding a good match online. However, I get all these demeaning messages from people and like sexist comments, and and we're just not sure. So that's like the objection of why I wouldn't want to. So really, like the value headline could be find your perfect match by making the first move. And that's what Bumble has really done for them. So sell the dream, answer the objection. Another key way to write a good headline. Another one that I'll tap into is really just building brand authority. And that's just by saying simply, what you do that's unique to others, like making a bold promise. And so I use examples from like Anchor FM, who you can just host podcasts with. They're like the easiest way to create a podcast. They just say it plain and simple. There's a company called Smile Direct Club that, their thing is safely straighten your teeth 100% from home. So it's a little bit of that answer the objection again, but it's literally like, what's so unique about them, right? That you can straighten your teeth from home without going to the dentist or, back and forth and scheduling all those appointments as well. But those are some ways to, really, write a good headline. Also just use some vivid imagery as well. I think some things as easy you can do is use metaphors more within your copy as well, because people can't visualize reimagining, window cleaning or, redefining buying cars online. Like Carvana talks about like, we're the vending machine for cars. Right. Great. And they show the picture and I'm like, see, that's cool. And like Burton snowboards, when they first were coming up years ago, nobody really knew what snowboarding was. So they're just like, it's like surfing on snow, and like, oh, that makes sense. And this is what the board is. And so, it's take some time to think about what is so unique about your product and your startup, because there is something there. It's why you created it in the first place. But again, try not to get lazy with redefining, reimagining, solutions. Those words are just lazy, and overdone. And I think you can do much better than that with some of like the advice that I just laid out.
Well, definitely, especially that kind of sell the dream and answer the objection. That's a great one. And yeah, people, you're appealing to their self-interest. They're not going to open your email because you're telling them about something that they can buy. They're going to open it if you promise them what they're offering.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. And then kind of tapping into that, playing on how people think and how we actually work and function. I want to talk to you a little bit about digital marketing and psychology. So there's been a shift where we now apply a lot of psychological insights to digital marketing, and we use them to optimize campaigns and ads and copy to drive sales. So how do you apply things specifically to your copy? Let's take a common, I suppose, psychological theory of scarcity. How do you put scarcity into your copy without it coming across super salesy and just like going out of business?
Going out of business, like FOMO, like 20% off. That's such a good question. And I think just like, and I'll just want to like touch on this too, is just like, there's so many people who are like these thought leaders who will start going out like, oh, if you want to get better at marketing, learn psychology. And that's like all they'll say. And like, it's like, there's so much more to it, and you can learn all these studies. It is just, the thing is just like applying them and implementing them. And it's something that, I've really taken a lot of time to try to figure that out. And it's something I do with my newsletter of how I can do that, as well. With scarcity, that's like, that's an interesting one of how we can tap into. And there's some other things you could look into, the element of offering them something for free first, right? To get them to potentially be a customer, right? It's like the reciprocation of everything. That's like a big psychology trigger. that people use. And it's just like why Christmas is so popular with us exchanging gifts all the time, because you give me something, and then,
I guess
you'll feel inclined to give me back something as well. I always like to use like go to big box stores and they have the free samples. You eat something and they're like, oh, it's right over there in aisle XY, in aisle C. It's like, well, now I'm a little bit more inclined to pick that up. I may put it away a few minutes later, but at least I'm more inclined to pick it up. But then there, like you can use that in your copy of just like start your free trial, or like the free trial ends in 10 days.
Yeah.
And that way that they can like try it. And then they feel like, okay, you're giving me this for free. That I'll feel more inclined to give something back to you. And it could be even a free gift, something like that within scarcity too, of just tapping into that, reciprocation of it, because that's something just as humans that we've been like evolving from just giving and giving back. Right. And then one psychology tip that I loved kind of talking about it, kind of, you can try to find ways to go in it with scarcity, but really it's the cognitive dissonance of it all. Right. And what that is just like this feeling of mental discomfort that results from holding two conflicting beliefs. Right. And for example, there's this really popular ad from Thailand a couple of years ago. It's like the most popular anti-smoking ad, where basically, are you familiar with this?
I don't think so. Tell me.
Well, it's really interesting because they have all these people on the streets and they're smoking, and then these two kids come by. It's a little boy or a little girl, and they have a cigarette and they want a light, and they ask the adults, can I get a light? And the adults are like, you can't, no, you shouldn't do this. This is bad for you. Right. And then so they keep getting turned down, but then the kid gives them this card, and it just says, why are you, basically I'll paraphrase. It's like, if you're telling me not to smoke, why are you doing it?
Yeah.
Right. And so then there's this number on the back that they can call. And like majority of the people, like a high majority of the people ended up calling that number to talk about how they can quit smoking. And it just was really impactful. And I just look at it as such a good example of like, if smoking can cause lung cancer, but you smoke anyway, like that's cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
And I think there's ways that we can do that in copy as well. How I like to refer to it as like closing the best self gap. So, we want this behavior, we have these beliefs of who our best self is, but then we're not doing those things, as well. And so some examples that I have here, and I may have touched on it, like, do you struggle with skipping workouts, right? Because you want to get healthy, but then you skip them and like, I'll do it tomorrow, right? So like that right there, that line is a good way to tap into that cognitive dissonance, to grab their attention right away, and keep them reading, because you're triggering what that question is the discomfort from the reader that they want to get in shape, but the skipping the workouts is one of the hard parts.
And there's
right?
like a little bit of guilt in that. So they kind of feel like, hey, I feel really bad about this. And he understands me speaking my language. So maybe I should definitely read this and see if it'll help.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you can even just continue to tap into like down the page or some of your other copy. Another example I use that I can think of is like, if you want to write your website in 10 days, like if you're offering that as a service, what you can do is like, you can kindly commit to a timeline and with step-by-step guide to write a website that converts, right? Like you're answering these things that like cause them to not do this behavior that they believe that they can achieve. So I think that's pretty interesting. And, a big one too for brands is, from a cognitive dissonance standpoint, is like, I look at it as like, let's say real estate agents, and like on their website, they're like, we have the best deals in the city, and they use dollar signs as the S, and they're like this luxury real estate agent. Well, like that right there is just forming this cognitive dissonance from your desired audience who can spend almost like millions of dollars on a home. It's like, well, now you look cheap and you're trying to sound like fun and cool, but it's not necessarily for me. So that's just something to be aware of as well. Like I'm all about writing how your customers speak and using customer language. But again, it goes back to knowing as much about your audience as possible.
Well, definitely, because even though the incredibly rich and the people who are after luxury will care about the price, I don't think they're going to be as attracted, like you said, to something that looks a little bit cheap and is cheesy. Agreed. Yeah. And then let's dig in a little bit to social media. So you're on social media. I've seen you on LinkedIn, on Twitter. probably on Instagram because everybody is, definitely on Facebook because everybody is, and the whole meta thing, and also on YouTube.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a little bit about your strategy for YouTube. You spoke about it a little bit, how you use it to kind of build videos that people are looking for. And then how do you apply copy to it? Because I think that's something people forget, that your video is not just quickly slapdash edit, stick it on YouTube. There's a lot that goes into it. You've got to craft a thumbnail. You've got to make sure that your title is worth looking at, that it's going to be something people will search for. And you've got to make sure that your copy is optimized.
Yeah, there's so many elements, like you just mentioned, like, and then even adding captions on it and having closed captions, right? Because we all start listening to stuff or watching stuff without the sound on too. I'll start with like the strategy element of it. For me, I think video was such like a big, important part of my strategy starting out, because I feel like that could separate myself a little bit as a freelance writer. Like I was just big into creating content, and that was some of the stuff that I just consumed, how I mentioned early, like from Gary Vee and from Dory Clark, of if you know something, don't hide it so much. Like something that helps you, like help something easy come to you, could be such a game changer for somebody else. And like hearing that just resonated with me, of just like, yeah, why don't I try to break this down into simple ways that people can understand? And used video a lot on LinkedIn, and I've been trying multiple things with YouTube. And one of the biggest things is I do a podcast called The Copy Corner, and we like record them live on YouTube, and then we take that audio and do it to, for the podcast. But we do it on YouTube. So that's been really fun. And it's just really doing my keyword research, having some tools like YouTube Buddy, or TubeBuddy, I think it's called, of just like kind of doing some of the keyword research. And it's usually like a how-to. Like I think how-to is one of like the most successful formulas you can have, because it gets you from point A to point B as a reader.
Goes on and to look at how to do something. I regularly sit on YouTube and I'm like, how do I fix my dishwasher?
Yeah, exactly. And so that's a big one for me. It's like, what's that simplest way I can ask that question? And then I just will typically use a simple formula of like, start with the problem in my description, then like agitate it a little bit, where it's like, it is hard to do, but this is what we can learn. And then when we go to that solution, I just list things in bullet points of what they'll get from the episode, just so it's easier to read as well. Give a little bit of white space in descriptions and captions, whether that's on Instagram and on LinkedIn, because blocks of text are just stressful to read. Maybe it just will throw people off. Right. But yeah, let's just continue to do research and find out what people may want to hear from creating videos.
That's great. And then, I think your strategy is an excellent one. I think more people should lean into this podcasting thing. I was quite skeptical when I started this one, just because I'm a consumer of podcasts rather than a creator initially. Not quite what I saw myself doing. My journey to where I am now is also quite a roundabout. I used to be an English teacher and I have a degree in dramatic arts.
Awesome.
I think it's a great way to kind of use content, and the way that you go about it, where you reuse that content and you repurpose it and recycle it, and you've got it on YouTube, you've got it on podcasting platforms, gives people options. Because even with your own audience, you're going to have people who consume or want to consume your content in different ways. And if you give them all these possible ways, then there's definitely more chance of them enjoying it.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I feel like that's what I've learned, because I started the Copy Corner with my friend. His name's Dan Marzullo, and it was just meant to be a video series on LinkedIn, because that's just kind of like where we were spending our time and getting a lot of like our customers. And then people would just call it a podcast. Like, oh, I really enjoy your podcast. And like, I'm like, well, it's not, it's a video series. And then we're just like, let's just make it a podcast now. And it's fun. And like you said, it's great recording it live, because then we could take those clips and, format them and make them for like Instagram Reels and TikTok or short videos on Twitter, to bring people to, listening to the full episode, but also just taking a good, valuable chunk from the interview and delivering it to people.
Yeah, that's what we do with this one as well. We've got our podcast clips where kind of take between 2 and 5 minutes of like really awesome value-packed advice from one of our experts, repackage it, and those are definitely easier to consume because some of these episodes can be like 50 minutes of really interesting stuff, but it's still 50 minutes of your life. So those like 2 to 5 minute shorts are great if you want to learn something really quickly. All right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then let us talk a little bit about what does your future look like for you? So is there something that you are aiming at in the next year? Because I think the last 2 years kind of messed with a lot of people's plans. A lot more people ended up digital than, well, certainly sooner than they planned to. So what does the future look like for you? Where are you aiming for the end of 2022?
Man, yeah, so I am looking to continue to build up my newsletter, and I think that's where a lot of like this content comes from, to bring traffic to there and to expand that audience. And what I'd really love to get into, and something I've really started exploring since the beginning of this new age that we're living in from the pandemic, is doing a little bit more like copy consulting with larger companies and doing like copywriting workshops. I really enjoy that. I really feel like I thrive in that kind of thinking on your feet element, especially delivering advice and seeing how other people are communicating their message. Like I've worked with sales teams on big companies and even with startups, and looking at their emails and their messaging and just coming up with new ways to refine those. I think that's great. And I'd love to just continue to expand on my community in this copywriting community. I'd love to, bring on more entrepreneurs and fellow writers and have like these workshops, have like this like extensive community that people can be a part of. I think at the beginning of the pandemic, I explored all these different avenues, right? And I'm just trying to refine and not try to do so much, which I think is always kind of my downfall, thinking, let's get this idea out here, or, oh, this is a good idea for a workshop. Let's create this page and do all this. And maybe just more planning out like the strategy all behind it.
I think it's a good goal to have. And then some short questions to end all of this off. So
Awesome.
the first one is, what advice would you give to your 18-year-old self looking back?
Oh man, it's such a good question. Oh boy. Let's see. I feel like I've like always thought about this answer. That when I'm on the spot, I'm like, what should I exactly say? For what would I tell my 18-year-old self? I would just say to just like know, almost just like just know your worth. Like know what your time is worth, and yeah, and just really know that you can really like do something on your own and turn an idea into it, like it turned it into reality. I think just like being 18 and just growing up thinking like, oh, I was going to have this 9 to 5 job and this structure, never thought I'd really be an entrepreneur. And just be like, and just go at that flexibility that will come from your life with that, and being able to see your work have like an immediate impact is pretty powerful.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't think many 18-year-olds kind of look and think, hey, I'm going to go out on my own and just do my own thing and it'll be fine. There's definitely a lot of fear that comes in. It'd be great to be able to say, hey, don't stress.
Yeah, exactly. Just tell them like whatever path you go, you can figure it out. Like, don't be so scared.
Yeah. Now I want to ask you, which brand has the best copy? Since you obviously consume quite a bit of it and you've had a hand in working with a lot of it. So which one is your favorite? Who consistently puts out something that you really enjoy?
Oh man. Gosh, I love this question. One of the first ones that come to mind is Squarespace, because I use it a lot for my business. And then like whenever I log in and see some of their ads, I just think it's really smart of how they do things. Like one campaign that they had like a little over a year ago was like a website makes it real. And I thought that was just so smart. And it's just like a website makes the it in that sentence is so powerful, because it could be like your e-commerce store, it could be your cupcake shop, it could be your freelance writing business. So I thought that was really cool. Love that. And I love what a lot of people do in like the outdoor recreation space. I think REI is great. I mentioned Burton earlier with the snowboard metaphor, but if you go to Burton, like they have like /brand, they have like their brand voice, their tagline, their style guide on there. And I think it's just so smart. And it's a great like copy swipe file for anybody of how they communicate their message. But I love what like Burton does. Patagonia's ads are great. I'll stick with that. I'll stick with those guys.
Okay, definitely. And then my final question for you is, where can our listeners find you? If you say your website or your social media tags, I'll pop them in the description.
Yeah, so you guys can go to terryschillingwrites.com, and there you can learn a little bit more about what I do, some of the resources that I have, but you also find to sign up for my cool copy newsletter, which goes out I say weekly. Sometimes I may skip one here and there, but it is mostly like 3 times a month, where I break down like an example and then share some other fun things that I'm seeing around the internet and in life from a copywriting standpoint. And honestly, if you just look up Terry Schilling copywriter across social media, I'm typically there. I'm more active on LinkedIn and Twitter than the other ones, but you'll find me on Instagram too as well.
Okay, fantastic. Terry, thank you so much for joining me and for giving me your time. And thank you to our listeners today. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to this on a podcasting app, subscribe to the Systeme podcast so that you never miss an episode. Systeme.io is a digital marketing platform packed with all the tools that you need to grow your online business.